Welcome to Making It with Terry Woolman, the show that explores the secrets, successes, and strategies for making it in the music biz. And now, here's your host, Terry Woolman.
Welcome to episode 138 of Making It with me, your host, Terry Woolman. I really appreciate you joining us every week, and I'd like to thank Blue Microphones for their technical support in continuing to bring our show to you during the World Health pandemic. Please continue to stay mindful and safe as we all work together as a global community. You can find all of our episodes on entertalkmedia.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or just go to terrywoolman.com/podcast. I hope you find my recent conversations with artists Bonnie James, Gino Vanelli, Toni Basil, Peter Erskine, Joe Vitale, Berklee College of Music President Roger Brown, and my most recent guest, Auschwitz survivor Rose Schindler, inspiring, comforting, and entertaining. I created the show to focus on what it takes to create and maintain a lasting career in the music and the entertainment business. My guest today is musician Oz Noy. It's jazz. It just doesn't sound like it. This is how virtuoso guitarist Oz Noy describes his intoxicating blend of jazz, funk, rock, blues, and R&B. Born in Israel, Oz started his professional career at the age of 13. By age 16, he was playing with top Israeli musicians and artists. By age 24, he was one of the most established studio guitar players in the country. Oz was also a member of the house band on Israel's top-rated show for more than 2 years. Since his 1996 arrival in New York, Oz has made a huge impact on the local and international music scene. His unique and intoxicating style has broken all the rules of instrumental guitar music by focusing on the groove. His latest album, released on Abstrack Logix, is called Booga Looga Loo. Oz Noy, welcome to Making It.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
It's good to see you. We met, fairly recently when you were in LA performing with our friend Willie and Steve Ferrone and
Jeff Young. Yeah,
Jeff Young on keyboards and singing. Fun night, really fun night. You know, it's really packed in the club, but fortunately I was able to seek you out for a minute and just say hi and talk. And I had a feeling you'd make a great guest on the show. So here we go. And I just want to start by saying, since we're speaking remotely due to the pandemic, and there's so much current social unrest in our country and around the world, how are you holding up in New York, and how's your family doing back in Israel?
I'm doing okay. It's boring.
Right. Yeah.
But, I keep myself occupied. Like if it was 100 years of that, I still have things to do. Music never ends, so you can practice. There's a lot of things that I wanted to do that I'm doing now, which is kind of cool.
Yeah.
There's a little bit of a kind of cleansing effect to this whole thing, because this is something that hopefully we're not going to experience more than once in our lifetime, but it's pretty interesting, And the most interesting thing about it is New York is completely empty and quiet, and it's almost like a ghost town.
Yeah.
And that's something really weird. Like yesterday, I came back from the park, and it was right before the curfew started.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the first time I've ever heard birds in New York.
In all the years that you've lived there?
Yeah, I swear. I suddenly was walking the street, and I was like, what is this? And I realized it was birds. I never heard birds. But because there was no cars in the street, there was no people, it was nothing. So there's something kind of weird, creepy, but also kind of cleansing about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. I didn't realize that. I guess I've never heard birds in New York either. I just never really thought about that.
I know, it's weird. The air smells and feels completely different.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
But that's in LA, I'm sure, in California also.
Oh, absolutely. Everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, but, between doing like some online lessons and some online sessions, I've been doing okay. It's really hard not able to play live. I'm kind of sick of just sitting in my, living room here, which is my studio, and just playing through my little amp.
Right.
And even if you plug in and record tracks, it's still not the same. But it is what it is for now. Yesterday, I went for the first time with a couple of friends of mine to the park, and we played in the park. That was a pretty amazing experience.
It must
but
have
that's
been.
it, really.
Yeah.
There's really nothing more I can do right now. And then as long as the summer is still here, I can probably keep doing the once in a while go and jam in the park. But once winter gets here, there's no chance of doing that. So I hope something will change by then. And my family, everybody's cool. In Israel, it's not as bad, and they kind of catched it on time and stuff. So it's much better than here. It's getting better now in New York, but it was pretty rough,
Are you seeing a lot of people behaving as if there is no virus, and are you concerned that it's going to come back again?
It's a good question. Well, I've been really surprised with how people react to it. Like, there are people that are on the extreme where they don't leave their house and they don't go out without the mask and they can't breathe around anybody. And then the other side is people that they don't say it's not real, but they don't like, fuck the mask, blah, blah, blah. And,
right.
No social distancing stuff. That pisses me off. I was in a cab the other day and the driver started to tell me, oh, is it really for real? And he wasn't wearing a mask. So
right.
I don't know, but most people are cool. Like, most people behave the way you should behave. And I guess everybody's got their comfort zone. Some people feel more comfortable, just being completely isolated, and some just kind of take their chances a little bit,
Mm-hmm.
I was surprised because I called a couple of musicians. I had this idea of, I'm not going to say which park it is. Like, I have two parks next to me, the Central Park and Riverside Park. And I wanted to just play live, just not for people and not for anybody, just for myself, to just interact with some real musicians, And I have a little amp with a battery. So I called a bunch of friends that live in the neighborhoods, like, hey, you guys want to go and play? And I was actually surprised of some people that were not comfortable with that, so everybody's got their comfort zone,
Yeah. I find that I slip in and out of comfort, and I think I get kind of pissed too that when people are running and skateboarding and walking by me and really close, and kind of triggers me. And I'm generally like healthy and relaxed. You do what you want to do, I'll do what I'm going to do. But
sure.
You mentioned being isolated and just we're both in our little studios, our home studios, and I really miss the connection of not just seeing people, like we're looking at each other, but being in a room and playing together, being on a stage, being in a studio, sharing a glass of wine or a cup of tea or something. But musically, that must have felt great to just go to the park and play with a couple of
friends. It was really weird because in the first couple of minutes, I was like, wow, it kind of felt like, what is this,
Right.
But then it got better and it got good, It's like, again, it was just like, it's kind of relief because, the weather was nice. You're outside. You're not too close to each other. So you kind of feel, and we've tried to find a place where there's not too many people around because I don't want to, I'm not into performing for people.
Right. You weren't looking for a crowd. You were just looking to play.
I just want to play and move some air with my amp. You know what I mean? That's all I want. That's all I need, I don't care if there's people there or not. I prefer not, really.
Right.
Difficult. But, it's cool that people walk by and, appreciate it.
Well, before we talk about your early years growing up in Israel and kind of what formed you as a musician, I just want to talk about your new album, your most recent album. So Let me read a couple words about it, and then we'll get into it. You've been described as New York guitar phenom, that rare artist who's cultivated his own distinct voice within the context of classic structures. In your own words, you've said, it's jazz. It just doesn't sound like it. So I've got well, let's even talk with the very first song that we heard in the intro of the show, Chocolate Souffle, which is a great song. I remember hearing you play it live. And two things about it that really struck me, especially listening to the recording. One is that in addition to that you've written a memorable melody, there's two really unique aspects to the piece that stand out. Your use of playing behind the beat, behind the rhythm section, sure, which I'm a huge fan of, and not many musicians really understand how to do that and to pull it off, but also the orchestration of using a trumpet and a flute. I thought was really kind of unique, and I really liked it. So tell me about that song and how you wrote it, why you named it that, and your approach.
Well, the first thing, I'll start at the end. The reason I use trumpet and flute is because usually when I make records, I try to come up with a concept before I make a record. And if I don't have a concept, I'm not inspired to write. I don't know what to write about. It's just like, I don't know. So when I have a concept, it kind of leads me towards certain things, So the concept of this record, and actually the second half of that record is coming out this year. And this year. It was kind of, I got into boogaloo music, like boogaloo tunes, like those organ trios that play boogaloo grooves and stuff. And then I also started to listen to some of those like CTI, like 70s jazz records when they start to use electric bass, like Freddie Hubbard or Grant Green. And a lot of those had this kind of like, there wasn't too many horns. There was just two horns, like trumpet and sax, or trumpet and flute, or sax and flute. And I really love that sound because it's just got a vibe, but it doesn't sound like a big band. You know what I mean?
Well, it speaks to your bebop roots as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Because those records to me, they're all jazz records. I grew up on really bebop,
Right.
So when I was doing this record, I thought that it would be really nice to have that kind of sound on it, because I was into those records, those kind of like 70s kind of sounding records. So again, I didn't want to put like some horn section. Like the record before that I did, Who Gives a Funk, it still didn't have a big horn section, but it had like trumpet, saxophone, trombone, which is the typical funk horn section. Mm-hmm. So that was, I was going there, but this one I wanted to get a kind of a different sound. So that was that part of it, in terms of the actual record, again, it was just a concept. Like before that record, I've done those two records that were called Twisted Blues, and it was Twisted Blues Volume 1 and Volume 2. And that was, my idea was to take all these blues formats and concepts and like chord structures and stuff, and just kind of twist them or put my angle on them. So that was that concept record, and I've done two of those. And then the record after was Who Gives a Funk. I was literally going for a straight up like kind of soul funk record. I tried to write really simple stuff. So when I have those kind of ideas in my head, I know what tunes I can write or what tunes I can use. So on the Booga Looga Loo record, the last one, he was basically taking boogaloo forms or inspired kind of boogaloo kind of things and kind of play with them. So when I have concepts like that, and I can start either looking for tunes that will fit or write my own, Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what I do actually is I listen to those kind of records for a while just to get a vibe, And then I may take like a drum groove that I like and write something in that style, or I may, you know what I mean? It's those kind of things, The thing about the song Chocolate Souffle that's interesting is my whole thing in the last couple of years has been, it's the hardest thing to do is to write memorable hooks,
Yeah, and not many instrumental artists do that.
Exactly, especially jazz guys.
Oh yeah, it's kind of boring actually, because it's a groove and a loop and then a ditty to get to the solo, and they forget the value of the melody, and you don't.
Yes, I was always into that pretty heavily, but the last couple of years it's almost become like a challenge for me to find strong hooks, Mm-hmm. Like I can do all this fancy chord stuff or fancy lines, but who cares about that stuff? You know what I mean? And I got to say that personally, I don't care about that stuff. Like, I will listen to it, and from a brain perspective, I'm going to go like, wow, this is incredible. I wish I can do that. Or wow, but from a heart perspective, it doesn't do anything to me. You know what I mean? So the story about chocolate soufflés, when I moved to New York, which was almost close to 24 years ago, 23 and a half or something. When I moved to New York, the first month when I was in New York, a part of that month, I lived at a friend's place in the East Village. And I remember that one time I was sitting on his couch. It was in 96. I was sitting on his couch and I was holding a nylon string guitar, and I came up with that line with those chords, like that, you know?
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote a tune. It was called Minor Shuffle. And it was the same hook, but it was a little different, and the bridge was different, and it was more in the Wes Montgomery style. And I recorded it as a demo with some of the jazz guys that I knew at the time because I just moved. And I had that tune for years, and again, when it comes to doing like concept records, which is what I always think of, I always look for tunes like, is this gonna work? It's gonna work. So I found that I suddenly remembered that tune. I listened to that demo. I was like, wow, it's a really strong hook, but stylistically, it's not going to work quite well with the rest of the record. So I rewrote it. Like, I kept the hook.
Mm-hmm.
I rewrote a B part. I changed some stuff in the A, and that's the tune. It's really hard to rewrite songs, but, So that's pretty much what happened.
So what made you... what led you creatively to playing the melody on the backside of the beat and letting the rhythm section just propel forward?
That stuff, I've done this over the years on and off without really thinking about it. It's just sometimes when I play a lot live, not now, obviously, but in life, I've played a lot live. And to me, the inspiration and everything happens when you play for real. Like, you can practice at home, you can practice with a track, whatever. That stuff's not for real. It's just... I don't know. It's like you go into the gym in order to develop muscles to be able to run a marathon. I don't know. You know what I mean? It's like,
I did.
So when I play live, a lot of times you just do certain things where you're aware of it or not. And a lot of times, what I probably did is we probably played this song live a bunch of times. I used to play it with this jazz band that I had. And I was probably just messing around with it and playing behind the beat. And I was like, okay, that sounds cool. And I kept it going. It wasn't any thought when I wrote it, you know what I mean? Right. It was just things happen when you play live. A lot of times accidents or mistakes turn into be like this really cool signature things in my playing, or like things like that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. But that's one of the things that I learned from Abraham Laboriel Sr., bass player, which is just to make a space for those mistakes and those moments to happen and to embrace them.
I'll tell you a funny story. And, I have this thing that people ask me about, which is, I do this thing with a tremolo that goes really fast. It's like that thing, and everybody asks me, how you did it? And I was like, I don't know, it's just a fast tremolo. So what happened with that was, the first part of it was I listened to a track of my friend years ago, and they played this track, and my friend, a drummer that was editing the track, he took the guitar part, and on Pro Tools you can edit it to edit in 16 notes, mutes and stuff like that. So he edited it like he would sound like a chopper. And I heard this track that they did with my friend guitar player, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. I wish I can do this on guitar. So I thought about a tremolo. So I bought this D-meter tremolo, and I put it all the way up, and I was able to get that effect. So that was the first part of it. Now then, when my first studio record came out, I went on tour in Japan, and I remember that moment because I remember it so clearly. And when I was playing in Japan, my foot hit the tremolo, and the time of the tremolo was when I was doing the chopper, it was almost all the way up. And when I hit the tremolo, it went all the way up, and then it was like really fast. And I remember when I was playing live again, and I suddenly hit it, I was like, oh shit, what is that? And then I suddenly started to go with it, And then I started to play rhythms with it. And, that's how those things happen, you know, like a mistake or something that you wouldn't expect to happen. Suddenly you're like, oh, I never thought about this. This is cool.
Now that sound has become part of the charm of your playing, one of your
part
of your vocabulary.
Yeah, exactly. So those things happen a lot, and they happen to me playing live. They never happen to me in my living room or something like that,
I wanted to ask you, because I was looking at your discography and saw that your very first record that you put out was a live record in 2005.
Yeah.
It was 2006.
No. It was there's always confusion about it because they re-released it. It was a 2002.
Right. I read 2 release dates.
Yeah, because they re-released it in 2005, I think.
But your first album was not a studio album. It was a live album. And I'm curious why you did that.
Well, because when I started to do my thing in New York, I didn't come to New York to be a solo artist. I never thought about being a solo artist. I just wanted to play and to play with the...
I didn't either. That was kind of one of those accidents that we're talking about, just being open.
I just thought that if I'm going to have a band, people would notice my playing, So I started a band, and people did notice my playing. The only thing I didn't realize at the time was when you're a leader, people notice you as a leader, so they actually don't call you for gigs like if you wouldn't have your own band. But I did get noticed, what I mean? It's kind of funny.
Mm-hmm.
So that's pretty much, that was like the beginning of it. And then I used to just play at the bitter end once a month in the beginning, sometimes twice a month, just to play, And then because I had that gig and I had that trio, I started to write for that trio just to have original things to play. Because when I started, I played covers. I remember Wayne Krantz came to one of my gigs and he said, man, it's great, but you have to write your own music. Because, and I was like, yeah, you're right. So then I started. But the reason I did this record, because at the time, they used to record the room with tape, So I used to get those tape recordings, just to kind of listen to it. And I made a demo CD of some live recordings from there. Again, it was just, I don't know why, just to maybe get a gig or something, And a good friend of mine, really great studio guitar player here named Mark Schulman, he listened to it and he started to come to my gigs. And I was like, hey man, you should do something with this. And I remember going to Israel one time, and I have 2 good friends of mine. They're producers and have a studio. And I brought him a bunch of produced stuff, and I was like, hey, check this out. I recorded this, blah, 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 in the studio, blah, blah, blah. And then he says, like, yeah, that's cool. And then I gave him that live recording, and the listener's like, man, this got a vibe. You got to record this. This is the thing, So I decided to do it live because I didn't have the balls to go in a studio. I didn't think I was good enough to nail it in a studio.
That's honest.
And I don't think I also had money for it either. But
right.
Yeah, but the reason I did it was there was the year prior to that I was playing with Richard Bona, the bass player.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a year when I toured with him and stuff. Then when I stopped doing that, I kind of thought to myself, well, I got to do something, So I thought that it would probably be a good idea if I can record. I can probably nail it live, you know what I mean? So the way I did is we did 2 Sunday nights, and we recorded the sound check and the gig. So, I had 4 sets of the music, recorded. And a friend of mine, engineer, brought you remember those D88 recordings?
I had them. Yeah, absolutely.
That's how we were recorded. That's it. And then I just chose a couple of takes. I think I edited a few takes together, but no, there wasn't much editing.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually how I learned Pro Tools, is through that record, and that was it. And then I released it on my own. And then after I did the record, the guy, the bitter end, gave me a steady Monday night to play there, which I actually played till recently, which was like 17 years straight of every Monday, And then somehow this record company heard about me through, I think it was Jerry Marotta, the drummer,
mm-hmm.
drummer. he knew some guys upstate that has this record company called Magna Carta. And I think they heard the demo CD that I had. They didn't even hear the live record. And they offered me a record deal. It was a small record deal, but it was a record deal. So I was able to, by that time that I was offered a record deal, I had music to do a whole record. That was the first record, I had the whole music and I was already playing it, you know? So they offered me this deal and I went in and recorded it in 2 days, you know?
It's a great story. And it makes sense. It all makes sense because it's dictated by and guided. Your decisions are guided by what's presented to you. You know, you have a certain amount of money or you don't have money, you're on the road or you're not. And you figure it out as you go. But I think it's kind of interesting that we're both in a way accidental artists. I mean, I put my band together for the same reason. Just wanted to play. You know, I had gone on a tour playing with Billy Preston and then came back and I would go, okay, this is great. Now my career is going to start. And it was crickets. Nothing happened. And so I thought, let me get out and play. I put a band together. And then I thought, well, I need to write some music. Did you write when you were younger or did you start?
I wrote a little bit. You know, the thing with me was, I don't know why, you know, growing up in Israelis love music and they love jazz, but Israel is not about music. You know what I mean? It's about raising families and about other bullshit that's going on all around there, obviously. But people do love music there, and there's great music education there, and there's great musicians there and stuff. But it's not like the first priority, you know? So, and I somehow remember myself always wanted to play and do stuff. I could never just sit at home and not do anything. Mm-hmm. So I remember even at times where I wasn't working much in Israel, wasn't working on what I wanted to do, I always kind of put together bands. And like I used to be a Wes Montgomery clone, so I used to play with a thumb, and I used to have like a L5 kind of copy guitar. And I used to do nights of most Wes Montgomery music, you know? So I always kind of was able, and then when I did those nights, then I started to write in that style, you know, because I thought, let me do that. And then it was the same thing throughout my career in Israel. Like, even when I was working, I always used to do jazz gigs and pop gigs. I've done that since I'm a kid, like literally since I'm 15 or something, or even younger, and studio work and stuff. So I always somehow had this urge to play, you know what I mean? And other friends of mine, some of them are great musicians, did not, you know? So I always had bands, even in Israel. With my trio, actually, the idea of my trio started in Israel. It didn't start in New York, you know? So I always was able to do that. And then when I was doing that, it gave me a kind of a reason to write. So I was writing in Israel a little bit, you know? I was writing, but it wasn't like intense writing. It was just kind of the writing in the style of, you know what I mean?
Well, that's like where we start.
I had a trio playing Stevie Ray Vaughan stuff, so I wrote in the style of, you know. Mm-hmm. But that was kind of pretty much the idea, you know.
So, Oz, take me back growing up in Israel. I read that you started playing music around 10 years old, starting on drums.
No, I didn't start on drums. I wanted to be a drummer. And my mom already was looking for a drum teacher for me, you know, and I had like pads and pants and stuff like that. I was still into it. And then I had a friend of mine in my neighborhood that was studying guitar, and he I don't know till this day why and how it happened, but he just told me, I was like, hey, come to see for me to a guitar lesson. So I went with him. And I remember I wasn't really digging it. Like, it wasn't anything that I was like, oh, my God, this is great. It was just like, oh, whatever. And I started to learn guitar. And I remember my mom borrowed a guitar from a friend or something. And I specifically remember going to that guy to do lessons. But I remember at home, it wasn't enjoyable to me or anything. Like, I just thought it was like, oh, whatever. So that's all I remember. But then the next phase of it was probably shortly after. My brother started playing bass, and his friend, they had a band, like a kids band with some friends, and his friend came over to our house, and he started playing Beatles songs and all those pop songs. And then I went like, oh, okay, now I get it. And then I got into it. You know, so basically the Beatles really was the reason, you know.
And it's remarkable because there's so many musicians, not just guitar players, and even not musicians, but people in the entertainment industry that I've interviewed on my show over the past 3 years because of the Beatles.
A magical drug.
Yeah, it's true.
Once you take it, you change your whole. So that was the beginning. And then the other significant thing that happened was, so my brother's friend used to come to the house and play all those Beatles songs or Israeli songs, So I started to dig that. Then I remember seeing them in I don't think he was in high school. I think he was just in, was it high school? I can't remember. No, just in school playing with their band. And I was like, wow, I want to do that. It looked pretty exciting. And then a year later, my brother started to bring jazz records home. I have no idea why, really. Like Chick Corea or McLaughlin, Al Di Meola, Kid Jarrett. Till this day, I was like, what the hell did you bring?
Was anyone else, your mom or dad, musical or artistic?
No.
Okay.
No. So then he was already playing bass. I was playing guitar. And he was kind of good at studying. So we started to play together. That's how I got into jazz,
But you got deep into jazz. I mean, most kids don't go down the bebop road early.
Well, what happened? So that was the biggest. Did both. So I always studied jazz and played jazz, but I also like pop and rock and stuff. So it was always together. So I think what happened was, once I started to get into jazz, I started to study it on different levels, obviously. And I remember that one of the things that really struck me pretty hard was I saw John McLaughlin came to Israel. I think he did a duo with Jonas Halper, the bass player. And I think that was the first real jazz concert I've seen. And I think, he's such a virtuoso. That thing really messed me up. And I was like, wow, I remember going home and trying to do it as fast as I could. Right? So that was one thing. And then I just started to get into, then that pretty much got me into the whole virtuoso guitar playing stuff. But at the same time, I had a kids band, like a teenager band. And we had a producer that wrote songs for us. So I started to do recordings like when I was maybe 14 or 15 because he had a little studio and, so that's how it started. So I started doing studio work at probably 15, I would say, even before. And then I started to get hired to play with people. I played with some pretty well-known singer-songwriters in Israel when I was really young. Like at 16, I started. At 18, I've done a couple of really big records there. Mm-hmm. And then my career was over. No, it's true.
It wasn't quite over because then you moved into playing in a late night talk show band or in a TV band.
I know, but it was funny. Like I was playing on a bunch of those big records and then, with those big guys, and then it suddenly stopped. Like I kept working. It's not that I wasn't working, and I was still working with some pop guys, but it suddenly kind of became flat. And then,
why do you think?
I don't know, because I don't know. I never thought about that. Probably because that's what was supposed to happen. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I did play with some well-known artists, but maybe not the biggest ones that I worked at the time with, Mm-hmm. And
Oz, one of the things you mentioned your love of pop music, and when I had asked you prior to us getting together for this conversation, I said, "Hey, let me know any kind of unique, fun, interesting facts about you, stories that people might not know about you." Your response was, I don't know. I guess the only thing is I like pop music. That was your one answer for everything. And I do too. And I thought it was a nice surprise to hear you say that. And I get it.
I love songwriting. You know what I mean? I like good production, whether it's cheesy or not. I like all that stuff, Mm-hmm. And I have deep appreciation to pop music and to songwriting because, first of all, that's what really hits me in the heart. And second of all, because, when you do studio work, you realize that it's a real craft, and you have to know how to do it. And people that do it, it's a whole thing. I admire producers and people like that, sound guys. I'm like, So to me, that's, and again, growing up doing, in Israel, the stations level is not like whatever happened in LA or New York, but still, I played on a couple of those kind of pop records there and stuff like that. So I was always deeply into that,
So let me ask you, since we both have had the fairly unique experience of playing in television bands for a couple of years, what was your favorite part of doing that, and what was your least favorite part of doing that?
I didn't have a least favorite part. I thought I liked it, but I was really, when I was doing it, I think I was 20 or 21, so you're pretty young, you know, and the TV show that I was doing, it was a weekend show, but it was the biggest TV show, like entertainment show, I think in history of TV in Israel. He had the highest rating, and he went on for 2 years. So I think the challenges was doing it every week for 2 years gets to you a little bit, but I think in general, I don't know. It was such a weird time for me. You're 20. What do you know? You know what I mean? It's like, but musically it was pretty cool. And in terms of like experience, it was really cool. And so once in a while, there's stuff on YouTube that comes up and I see myself on the corner. That's kind of rough, you know, but the one thing that I do remember is the host of the show that actually died since. That's a whole other tragic story. But he did not like music. But because we were playing in this big theater, we had to warm up the crowd. So we used to play. And that's the stuff that I really loved about it. We used to jam before. And, you know, I'm a guitar player. I had Marshall behind me. And every time he came on stage, it's like, turn this shit down. So
nice to be appreciated, right?
Yeah, he was something. One time we did a show outside on the beach somewhere, and he was in a hotel probably, I don't know, just like getting his makeup or something or trying to rest, and we did a sound check, and he screamed out of the window. I never forget it. It was like, oh, kick that guitar player guy out. It's too loud. So that's what I remember. That's my good memories from that show.
I want to talk about gear a little bit. This is not a gear show, but I do want to talk about endorsements and a couple of things. But before that, I want to talk about your philosophy about asking people that you don't know earlier in your career when you moved to New York to play with you. You know, I know the backstory behind you and our friend Will Lee. And I think it takes courage and confidence, you know, or a certain amount of fearlessness or willingness to just be rejected or go for it. Yeah. To ask somebody, hey, because like you said, well, you're Will Lee, but you said you wanted to play with me, so I'm asking. Yeah. Was that hard for you, or what's your thoughts about that?
My thoughts about it is when you're in your mid-20s, that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? Like now, if I want to play with someone I really admire, I will think 10 times before you know what I mean? But then you're like, whatever.
Which is kind of ironic because you're more established now, so the chances of them saying yes are possibly greater right now. Exactly, but that's interesting. So the fact that like if Joe Sample were alive and you saw him and you wanted him to play with you, you might have second.
Yeah, I might be really. I was like, I might be pretty. How do you say intimidated?
Sure. Yeah.
Well, I think at the time, my stuff happened pretty gradually. It wasn't like those jumps. I still feel like I'm just developing. I never really made it anywhere. I think I'm still kind of on my way up somewhere, you know, hopefully. But it was always gradual. It wasn't that one time I suddenly went like boom, you know. So it started with me getting a gig or two in New York that I can play a band, and then I was introduced to Anton Fig, the drummer.
So before we even go there, what was your first week, month, year like in New York? I mean, did you have to drive a taxi? Were you sleeping on a couch?
I came to New York with $10,000 in my pocket, which at the time in '96 was not bad. Like today, $10,000 in New York ends in 2 months. You know what I mean?
I came to LA with 1,000, but it was 1981, so I had another zero. Yeah.
So $10,000, you can probably be okay for like 6 months or something. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I came. I found a place. This is actually the same. This is the only apartment I ever had in New York.
Oh, the whole time you've lived there?
Yep.
How great is that?
It's freaking great.
Yeah.
It's a great apartment. It's awesome.
It looks really comfortable.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
So that was the first thing. I think I always say that's the reason I survived New York is because I found this apartment, you know. And then I just started to go to jam sessions. The first year was pretty rough because there was a lot of jam sessions that's going on really late, like Smalls, the club. And you used to wait till like 2 a.m. to play to sit in on a song, on a jazz tune. So that was really rough. And there was all these blues jams. None of it really exists anymore. Maybe the jam at Smalls, but it's unfortunate none of that other stuff exists anymore. But
that's not because of the COVID. That's just in general that's gone away.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's because New York has changed. But so basically, the first year or so was pretty much hanging out every night till really late. I remember it got to a point where I would start to get up at 2 p.m, which I really hated because you don't feel right. But I've done that, and then I started to meet people and get little gigs here and there, and it took forever. It still takes forever. Nothing is certain with this, you know what I mean? So that was the first maybe year or two. But the thing that was interesting is one of the major development in my New York career was a friend of mine, drummer, called me she said there's a birthday party for this drummer, Richard Crooks. He's like this old school drummer that passed in this club. So come, I'm going to host there was going to be a jam. So come. So I went to this club. It was actually not far from where I lived. And I sat in and played, and there was a bass player that after we finished playing, it was like, wow, you can really play the blues. And I was like, all right. And he somehow got me that I have something, So he started to call me to sit in with his band, which was at a club called La Barbette. La Barbette used to be a very famous studio in New York in the 80s. They're like Ribbon in the Sky, Stevie Wonder's song was recorded there. A lot of big hits were recorded there. It was a beautiful room. So they turned it into a club. And you could see how beautiful the studio was because of all the wood and stuff. So I used to go to that club and this jam, and the guy that was the booking the club, and the sound man, I don't know why they somehow thought that I'm good, that I play good. And they kind of endorsed me almost, like they started to call me to sit in with different bands when they needed a guitar player or when they didn't. And then they gave me a monthly gig that paid. So then it was kind of rare to get a paid gig after like 8 months of being in New York, Right. So then I put together a band. At the time, he had horns, actually. And they introduced me to Anton Fig, the drummer.
Right, and you had mentioned that Anton was very influential in helping you.
Yeah, exactly. So, because he was doing the Letterman show with Will. Mm-hmm. So then Anton was really open to playing, and he liked my playing too. So I started to play with Anton, and because Anton was at the gig, I was able to contact a lot of musicians that I wanted to play with, because I had a name guy in the band. So, I would call like Mark Egan. So it's like, oh, if Anton's on the gig, sure, I'll do it. I don't know who that kid is, but, And, I remember calling Bernard Wright, the keyboard player. And, there's a bunch of people that I called at the time because it was paying like $100 a guy, which is rare for somebody. And also because I had some name guys in the band, So that was one part of it. That's how that part started. And then the other part of it was the bitter end. The reason I played the bitter end is because there used to be a Sunday night jam session there. Every Sunday night. So as soon as I moved to New York, I used to go to that jam session all the time. And then I started to get called to do that gig here and there as a house band. And at the same time that I got there and started to go, the drummer Keith Carlock moved to town. So me and Keith ended up doing those Sunday night jams with that guy for a while. So that's how I was introduced to Keith. So basically, that's how it started. Like I was playing with Keith, and I was playing with Anton, and those were my two drummers for many, many records. Really, that was the band.
Right, and you can hang your hat on that. You can call anybody because when they say, "Well, who else is in the band?"
Yeah,
all of a sudden you have their attention.
Yeah. So then, what happened then is I always loved Will's playing. He was always like my hero. You know what I mean? And I remember asking Anton if Will will play, and I never heard anything back. For years, actually, it was for years, not a year. And so I thought, like, okay, I guess I'm not there yet, So I started to play with James Genus and a couple other people and make, the first record. Actually, Will is only on one track. But so I started to play with certain guys, but it was just the guys that were in town, and they're all really great players. Some of them I still play with. The connection with Will happened after when I recorded my first album, the live album at the bitter end. Will probably heard about it, and he kind of remembered probably my recording or something. And I'll never forget it. I was hanging at this restaurant that Anton was playing, and Will came, and he goes like, "Hey man, why didn't you call me to play with you?" And I was like, "Okay." So then what happened is a few weeks later, my bass player couldn't do it, and I called Will, and he did it, and that became like the band with Anton and Will and myself, and that was a real band. So it was that, and then sometimes we would do double drummers. So it was Will and Carlock and Keith and myself, and also James Genus was always a part of it. So it was always either James or Will or Keith or Anton for years, really. You know, it hasn't really changed much, like till the last couple of years. You know, so that was the beginning of, you know. And at the same time, I started to get called to do some gigs. You know,
Great story. So I'm curious about since you travel, even though you're not traveling right now, none of us are, but I read that you have 3 pedal boards, and they seem like they were kind of similar, maybe slightly different sizes and a bit of variation. Do you keep a pedal board in LA or in Israel?
No, I keep an amp in LA because if I have the West Coast stuff, I have a bunch of Tool Rock amps, and one of them is in LA. So that's a good thing to do. The thing with my pedal boards is I have the thing with pedal boards is because of the whole thing with the airlines restrictions, it's gotten harder and harder to travel with what you want to play, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Which is like, it's almost like a friend of mine. One time I met, Dave Fusinski is a guitar player.
Yeah.
So he said something really smart. He says like, it's amazing how airlines changed the sound of live music.
Wow, I've never heard anybody say that, but they sure did.
Isn't that deep?
Yep.
Airlines changed the sound of live music because you can't go and bring stuff. It's too expensive, you know. So when I travel, I can only travel with one guitar unless I go to Japan or something where I don't have to move. Then I can take 2 guitars in the bag. But if you have to travel, and even in vans or in like planes, obviously is the problem. Traveling with 2 guitars, forget about it. It's no chance. And then, so the thing with the pedal board is I had a pedal board that I really liked. It was great. So I still have it, you know, but it's heavy. It's heavier than what's necessary. So for basically, I have a smaller version of that has almost everything I need, and it's close enough. And for certain type of travel, I just do that because dealing with airlines with overweight, it's a nightmare.
It is a nightmare. It is.
And then the other thing about it is, I'm sure you know about it, but you try to travel only with one airline in order to get your status. And I live off my status. I would not fly anywhere unless it's that. You know, so that stuff became like such a mind fuck, really. But that's the story behind the pedal board, you know.
So with traveling with one guitar, do you rent a second guitar for just?
No.
You just go for it.
I normally don't break strings.
Even as aggressively as you play, or do you not play as hard as it sounds like?
I don't play aggressively at all.
Okay, you just
actually don't.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and also I use heavy strings, which actually doesn't always mean you're not gonna break. But I use 11s, you know.
Right.
So between using 11s and I don't think I play aggressively. Then I think you do okay, you know.
You're a D'Addario endorsee as well as I am.
Yeah.
You know, one of the things I love about that company is they're kind of my one stop. I know that you play nylon and acoustic and electric and baritone and things like that too. So I would imagine your experience has been the same with them. You know, whatever you need, you can pretty much get from them.
Yeah.
Let's talk about endorsements for a moment. What's your philosophy about endorsements?
I do not play I don't endorse anything that I don't really play, period. I never have. It's easier for me to talk about it now because I have all the gear and endorsements that I want.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't need anything. But when I needed stuff, then it was a whole other story, you know what I mean? So you had to go and try to... Now if I need anything, I just contact the company. I go like, hey, can I get an artist price? That's all. I never ask for anything for free. I'm not into that at all. And if they can give me an artist price, fine. If not, I'll just buy it anyhow. It's not like a big deal, you know?
Right.
And the things that I really endorse are things that I really, really use. Like the Darius strings, I really use that all the time. I don't know. Exotic pedals, I don't know, line 6 stuff. It's stuff that, it's not only stuff that I use, it's stuff that breaks when you travel. So you have to have support, you know? Tour rock amps, everywhere I go, like certain tours, they send me stuff, you know what I mean? So that stuff is really important, but it's important because I really need it, you know what I mean? It's not important because, hey, they're giving me a free amp, you know what I mean?
Right. And some of, like what you're saying, some of the artist relationships that you have are with companies who make gear that you've already been using.
Yeah, and like Fender guitars, all that stuff. Fender is problematic because they're so huge, but still, you know, it's like I don't have an endorsement with Gibson because I have a Gibson guitar, but I just don't use it that much. So it's like, I'm not going to go and ask them for, you know what I mean?
Right. What about Fender? Because actually they've been more collaborative with you. They've designed a couple of guitars with you, haven't they?
No, Fender never designed anything with me. No.
Okay.
They made guitars for me, but they never designed.
Got it.
I have Exotic Pedals design a pedal for me, like a signature pedal. And Vemuram is this Japanese company that makes an extraordinary pedal. They design a fuzz for me, like a signature fuzz. Those are the only 2 things that I had. And there were also like limited edition kind of stuff.
Right. Well, what was that experience like with Exotic, since we both work with them and endorse them? Did Toshio have an idea for you?
No, here's the thing. The thing is, first of all, I love those guys. I think they're one of the most important companies there is for guitar, period.
I agree. I really do. I'm glad you said that.
But the thing about that is their stuff became such a big part of my sound, you know, it became such a thing for me, you know what I mean? That at some point, I was always on good terms with them and in touch with them, but at some point I was like, hey, can you make me a pedal that will have the RC and the AC in it as one pedal? Which at the time, it didn't sound like anything special, but I told them I wanted the AC, the RC part to have more gain, that I can drive it more, because one of my signature tones, or the tones that I use, are the RC into the AC. So I told him it would be great if it would be just in one pedal. So Kiyoshi, the engineer, he started to design it, and I gotta say that it sounds, the pedals that they came up with, the one that I have, they sound better than the 2 separate ones. I actually just recently took the original white and yellow one out of my recording rack and put that because it just sounds better. So, you know, he knew what I was going for. He knew what I wanted. So it didn't take that long for him to do it, you know.
But do they still sell them, or they were limited edition and they're gone?
I think they did. They did a limited. I don't know if you can. They don't. I don't think they have any left, but you can maybe find them online. I talked to him about maybe redo. He said that he might redo them again because they're really great pedals. But I don't know. I think you can find them maybe on eBay or something, I don't know, or not. The thing about the fuzz thing, just for a second, the Vemuram fuzz, that company is to my opinion, is as important as Exotic for guitar players. And I used to play this shank fuzz, you know, they have a shank fuzz. And I always asked them, can you make me one with more gain? And they kept sending me, they were really nice, and they kept sending me those pedals, and none of them was enough. It was always great, and I used it on records and stuff, but one time I was playing in Japan, and they came to the sound check, and the guy brought me a pedal. He goes like, hey, we made this for you. You might like it. And that was the fuzz. So I played it, and then I started the tour. I remember it was the beginning of an Asian tour, and I ended up doing the whole tour with that pedal. And after I came back, I was like, man, this is incredible.
That's it. They nailed it.
Yeah. So then I told him, you know, if you want to make it a thing for me, I'll be happy. And they did, although I gotta say that in order to recreate that pedal, it took a while because it's all old parts, so they can only do 400 or 600 parts because they try to do with other parts and it just doesn't sound the same. Mm-hmm. So it's all vintage parts. So anyhow, that's the story.
Well, that's enough geeking out about gear, which I never do on this show, but I thought it'd be fun with you, even with all the guitar players I've spoken to. Let's talk about teaching, mentoring, and remote sessions, because one of the things that people might not realize, I mean, you've already done this and this is not new for you, but right now you're at home, you're available. We're all available, and we're all trying to figure out how to continue to make a living as musicians. So you've got multiple DVDs. You've worked with True Fire and Musicians Institute and great companies. But you're also available for private lessons if somebody wants to have a Skype or Zoom lesson, or playing on people's records. So tell people about that. How can they reach you? And also, how do you feel about that? Do you enjoy teaching? Why do you teach?
Well, first of all, I always thought and I always did remote sessions. So that whole thing was always there. I was really surprised when this whole pandemic started. The first couple of weeks, I thought like, well, people know I'm sure people know I can teach online and record online, so they'll hit me up, but nothing happened. And then I realized, I probably need to say something. So I posted on Instagram, Facebook, that I teach online and that I record online. And I got tons of people asking. So I was like, wow, that's interesting. I didn't realize that. I guess you shouldn't take anything for granted, you know?
I agree with that. And also, never take anything for granted. But the other thing is the irony, as artists like ourselves are available right now for mentoring and teaching and always have been. Yeah. Some of our audience, the people that would actually want to study with us or have us play on their tracks, they don't have work either right now. Yeah. So there's a little bit of an irony to that.
I said, I still do those posts sometimes that says like, listen, I'll be gentle with my rates, Yeah. And I am. I even gave a couple of free lessons to a couple of people, like somebody in India, somebody actually I think in Pakistan. Some young girl in Pakistan wanted to get, so I do that. But in terms of, do I like it? Do I like to do stuff remotely? No. I don't care what everybody say. I'm sick of watching people doing shows out of their living rooms. It's bullshit. It's okay for now. It's not for real. And it can sustain. It's not going to sustain. Music is, you have to be in a room with a person. It's just not, it's just not going to sustain. It's not going to be, you got to get back at some point to what it used to be, So,
do you see those doors opening soon? Are there are there safe venues?
Unfortunately, I don't see any live music happening till either the virus like almost disappears, or there's some kind of vaccine, or there's some medication, because nobody's gonna sit in a room. I do want to say one thing, that there are clubs that might be possible to do this. Like clubs that are big enough that may be going to be able to do like online streaming and then have a very limited amount of people just spread around the room just for the feel of it. Then you can maybe play live a little bit, but none of that stuff is going to happen till this is going to be over.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a while.
It's going to be a while. So, but again, the thing for me with doing online teaching, first of all, since this thing started, I've never thought that much in my life, really. I always was giving lessons, but this is, a whole other level of it. Although now it's chilling out a little bit. The thing about teaching online on Skype or Zoom is you can only give information, transfer information. Like you can't really hear the guy play. You can't even hear the guy if he plays in time, because I've done it a couple of times when I had a guy, I was like, okay, put a metronome on and then play with a metronome. I want to see if you can play in time. And then because of the Skype or because of the internet
connection, it cancels each other out.
No, it just jumps. So the metronome is out of time. You hear like clack, 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 because of the connection. So it's very limited. There's not much you can do. You can only basically transfer information, give information, and give tips or ideas of what to do. But you can't play with a guy, you know. And the other thing that is really challenging, that's actually the most challenging thing about teaching online like that, is you don't know who's in front of you. Like if somebody comes to my house, I was like, okay, let's play blues. Within like 2 minutes, I know where he's at. Like I know exactly what he knows and what he doesn't. With this, you have to kind of guess where the guy is, you know, from the questions, from a little bit of noodling. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you don't guess right, you know what I mean? So I don't like that part. But again, for certain people, it works great, you know? Mm-hmm. And remote recordings, I've done that plenty before. It's cool because I'm at home and I have all my guitars here and all my sounds and my amps and everything. So that's cool. What I don't like about it is that you have to guess a lot of times what people want or don't want. And that's been like that forever. So that, you know, that's whatever that is, right. You know, that's something that you deal with.
Can you play with volume at home without your neighbors going crazy? How do you record?
No. Well, the way I record at home is I have a bunch of heads here. I have an old Marshall or Tool Rock and a Twin Reverb, all heads. And they go to an aux, to universal aux. Mm-hmm. You know that thing?
No.
Oh, you plug in the heads into it. Mm-hmm. It's got a load.
Right.
And then you have all these different IRs, impulse response of cabinets. So it's basically fake cabinets, you know? Mm-hmm. It sounds very, very good. My good friends, James Santiago, invented and designed it. So
what's the name of the company?
Universal Audio.
Universal Audio, UA.
Yeah, okay. So the aux.
Got it.
So that's the perfect situation scenario for a musician in New York. Does it sound like a real amp? 80%. Certain tones you get out of it are really great, actually. But certain things, when you want a real clean sound and some more depth, sometimes it's a little harder to get from that. So, you know, I have some little amps here that I can record, but there's always the issue that it always, you know, even if you open a Princeton on 3, it's loud.
Right.
You know what I mean? So it's really, I've been struggling with this forever with the whole thing. Like I used to put amps in a closet, but then you either hear the closet too much or you can't open it up, or if you open it up, then suddenly a neighbor will hear it. And, you know, so it's like, it's very limited to do this kind of stuff in New York. It's pretty frustrating for me personally.
What about recording acoustic instruments in your house? Can you do that without traffic noise?
I can do that, and I do that, but it's the same thing. Like I can't do it with a large diaphragm mic because it will grab all the noise in the room. So I do it with a pencil mic, then it only grabs the guitar, and it sounds good. But again, you can't really do it you can't do it 100%.
It's not like being in a room, a studio.
Exactly, or in a closed, you know, environment.
Right.
Yeah, so I get good results. I never had complaints, but I get frustrated from it because I know that I can't. Plus, the other thing, I like to bring my big studios my big amps into a studio and open volume and put mics and do it.
Yeah, move some air.
Yeah, so you can't really move much air in an apartment in New York. That's the problem.
But, you know, I guess the payoff or the balance in that is the opportunities that have been afforded to you musically and artistically by being in New York. Yeah.
Plus, you know, in reality, look, you know, on most of the things that I do, that I ask to do, I would say that 95% of the time, whatever I get here is good enough. You know what I mean? It's like when I'm saying good enough, it's good. It's not bad for any reason. Mm-hmm. But, you know, if I want to really get my sound that I get on the records, then I got to go to a real studio and bring my big amps. I can't do it with a little Princeton or go direct. You know what I mean? It's just not going to happen.
As we're getting towards the end of our conversation, I wanted to talk about some personal things. And one of them is just to get to know you a little bit better, but also for fans to get to know you. What inspires you in life, and also what inspires you in art?
I don't know. What inspires? I don't have an answer to it. I kind of feel like I'm always just walking around, just listening and looking at things and just being open to stuff. You know what I mean? I don't know what inspires me. You know what I mean? Like I can listen to I don't know, I can look at a painting and it's going to inspire me, or I can just listen to a dumb pop song and it's going to inspire me. You know what I mean? I don't have that kind of sense of thinking, you know?
Well, maybe it sounds like you walk through life in a self-creative, perpetual...
I think so, yeah. You know, I can tell you what does not inspire me.
My next question. Yeah, go ahead.
But what does not inspire me is the business aspect of music.
Right.
And I know that you have to have it together because you're an adult and you have to make money to live, which is fine. You know, I'm not against that at all. But it's a little uninspiring to me to hear certain musicians talk about it as a business and look at it as a business and act like it as a business. I'm not saying you're not supposed to do it, but when it's a little too much business and not enough music and inspiration, then that's really uninspiring to me, you know?
But speaking to that, and I do know what you mean, and the business side of music wears me out as well. Yeah. So I absolutely get it and agree with you. But you also, like, you're comfortable, you know your worth, you know your value, because you've done $100 gigs and you've done $1,000 gigs for the same work. So, yeah. You know, and it's part of the strangeness of our business. Once we establish a rate, that doesn't mean that you always get that rate for everything that you do. Course. So I think it sucks more energy out of artists than regular business people, because there's this more linear.
Of course.
So it's more just of a distraction. You don't
just like the jungle.
Right. You don't just get to say my rate is this per hour or this per song, and it's always going to be that way.
You know what I learned? This is a really interesting experience. When this pandemic started, when I posted that I teach and my rates are, you know, I'm kind of flexible with my rates, a lot of people contact me, and I thought about how am I gonna approach this, you know? So then what I ended up doing, I was like, you know what? Let me be as honest as I could. So I told everybody, I was like, hey, this is what I normally get for a lesson.
Right, here's my rate.
But tell me what you can afford. And for recording, I did kind of the same, but I put a cap. I was like, okay, this is what I normally charge. This is my love price. If you can do the love price, fine. If you could do what I charge, great. Anywhere in the middle is fine. So I was totally honest about it. And it took the whole negotiation thing out of the window, which is great. So I just throw it out there. I was like, okay, I can do it for this. I can do it for this. I'm fine. You guys decide. And I got to be honest that everybody so far got the idea. And they were like, okay, I can pay you this. I can pay you a little more. I can pay you the whole thing. And it's great. It's kind of took that whole bullshit out of the way. So
that's
now
refreshing. That's really refreshing.
Yeah, and I even actually... Keith Carla called me the other day and he goes, hey, you played on that track for that guy? I was like, yeah. He goes like, he asked me, I was like, why do I charge him? Because it's really problematic. You never know if somebody's got money or how much money or this. So I told him, man, this is what I'm doing now. I'm telling them this is my real rate. This is the list I can do, and you decide. And most people are cool. Like, I think everybody was cool so far.
Oz, I'm hoping that kind of honesty and simplicity and transparency carries over when this pandemic is over. I think it's a really great way just to go through life. Yeah.
You know, I got to say that if I would have had to deal with a record company or some shrewd business guys in the business, I wouldn't do that.
No, you can't.
No, but for regular people that are kind of just wants to get a piece of what you do, then it's fine, you know? Right. So I'm actually happy about it. That was a big revelation to me.
That makes me really happy to hear you say that. I just think it's great. I think I'm going to employ the same idea. I have been as well, but you just said it in a really crystal clear way. It's simplifies.
Because I thought about it, because every time I get an email for somebody that wants to record with me, I was like, oh, well, you know, and then I was like, you know, enough with this.
Right. Enough of getting like all worked up about something that's just...
Yeah, it's like, this is it. This is what it is. And, you know, and even a couple of times a guy, one person or two asked me, hey, can you do it for a little less than your love price? I was like, sure.
Right.
Fine. You know, it's like, as long as it's not stupid, it's fine. You know?
Where can people find you if they're interested in hiring you and getting your musical talent on their project, or also lessons or mentoring or anything like that?
Well, the best way is just to email me at oz@oznoy.com. But even if they send me a message on Instagram or Facebook, or even if they go to my website, there's a way to hit me up there. So it's easy to get.
Great. We're going to post your website link as well so everybody can find it easily along with the interview. Just a few more personal questions. What lessons about art and about life have you learned along your journey in life? And how has your perspective changed as you've gotten older?
The lesson that I've learned is everything ends up okay at the end. Things work out. So my dad always used to say, "Don't worry, you'll be okay," and it actually is ending up being okay normally. So that's one thing. The other thing is what your expectations and what you actually end up getting at the end are a lot of times different, but it doesn't mean that it's bad. It's just different than your original vision. You know what I mean?
I do.
So I think those are the two main things. I'm sure I can think of a couple other things. But
by the way, that's crystal clear. So, and I agree with you on that.
Yeah.
My closing questions that I ask all of my guests, since this show is called Making It, what does making it mean to you, both in business and also on a personal level? And also, can you share 3 tips for success that have driven your career?
Well, first of all, when I'll make it, I can tell you what it means.
Let me know. Can't wait to get that phone call.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. So ask the question again, because I missed some of it.
What does making it mean to you?
Oh, what does it mean to me?
Personally and professionally.
Professionally, it means making a living playing music, period. That's hard enough as it is. Personally is, put something out there that people like, really. That's pretty much it. Yeah.
So 3 tips for success that have driven your career.
Don't be an asshole. That's the first one. Second one, I think human interaction is really important, meaning practicing at home is great, but going out of your house and playing with people for real, that's where it's at. That's real. And I know right now it's like the world is upside down, so we can't do it. But there's never going to be anything but that, to my opinion. It's never going to change, The way you make music is by interacting with other people. The way you learn is by interacting with other people. The way you learn how you sound, how you play, it's all about interaction with people. And it can't be online. It has to be in the same room playing together, Mm-hmm. And the third thing is, don't worry. I think is basically don't worry about what's going to happen in 10 years from now, or just do what you love, because that's the most important thing, really.
I agree.
Yeah.
You might have already answered my last question that I'm going to ask you right now with the advice that your dad gave you, but I'm still going to ask the question. Sure. At this point of your life, with everything that you know to be true, if you could, what would you tell your younger self?
I would say the same thing. Don't worry, it'll be okay. Just work on it.
Oz, it's been really great talking with you and getting to know you a little bit better and sharing your story. Closing thoughts, anything on your heart, on your mind that you want to share with our listeners before we say goodbye?
I don't have anything specific. I think we're at a time where we just have to hope things will all fall into place and fall in the right place and not in the wrong place, because we can be really screwed if things are falling in the wrong place now. So I'm just hoping that everything's going to be okay. Like my dad says, don't worry, be all right. I just hope things will just be all right. And that's it. That's nothing else we can do right now. Just,
Well, on that note, thank you for spending the hour with me. Thanks to all of the listeners to spending the hour with Oz and I. And Oz, please stay safe. And to everybody out there, stay safe. Take good care of yourself.
Tune in again next week for another great episode of Making It with Terry Wollman.